Okay,
Lost me down.
all right, so
Wait, hold on, sure. I was still.
at some point, Christina will sort of count noses and figure out who's here and who's absent.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so we'll go on to consideration of the minutes of the last meeting of March 27th.
Move approval.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Is there for a second? Okay, Bill seconds. Any discussion? Those in favor? Abstentions? Opposition? Right, that passes unanimously. And then, Bridget, I guess you will sort of take us into the heart of it.
That was easy. Okay, so we talked about doing a little bit of education last meeting. So I put together like a short, kind of informal presentation on zoning, land use in town based on what we talked about, and planning board things. How does all that work? So just go through it. So basically, zoning exists to provide you with rules on how land to be used. So it dictates sort of what kind of buildings are allowed, how high they can go, how far away they can be from the neighbor. If you're allowed to have a business there, if it has to be a house, those kind of things. So the first zoning ordinance in Cumberland was in 1949. And that actually surprised me. I feel like that was a little bit early, but I don't know. I don't know what's normal in Maine. It's been around for a while.
That was
so-
early.
It was really.
Yeah.
But our current zoning ordinance has 8 articles and 82 chapters. So it is a hefty chunk of that big book there, also all digital and available online, for your reading pleasure. There are 17 zoning districts in Cumberland. And basically the 17 are, I kind of think of them in 2 buckets. There's residential and there's commercial. And they do overlap. So some zoning districts are allowed to have residential uses and commercial uses. And those residential uses range from single family homes to duplexes to multiplexes, which is 3 or more units in one building. Commercial uses range from all sorts of things, restaurants, cafes, municipal uses. There's a super blue of them, and the whole ordinance can be around. I was gonna bring it up and show you, and I don't know why it isn't working, but it's all available on our website, and I'm gonna kind of go through it a little bit. The other thing that the zoning ordinance does, it sort of tells you how to do things on your land. So, for example, signs, for example, so signs for businesses, there's an ordinance that says these are the kinds of signs that they are allowed. This is the square footage of the face of the sign. This is the style of the sign that we want to have in Cumberland as a business. Right now, the current zoning ordinance restricts the business to 2 signs, one ground mounted and one on the building. Planning board's gonna maybe look at that. Well, planning board's gonna look at that actually on Tuesday to change and update, to allow for more signs in various commercial districts. So, as businesses expand and grow, they want to look at things and potentially have changes that we want to implement. So zoning can be changed. We can make moves to change it, and the process in Cumberland for that is dictated through the ordinance, and the zoning changes can be initiated by a resident making a request to town council or to the planning board. Planning board themselves can initiate a zoning change. Town council themselves can initiate a zoning change. The ones that's been initiated, it kind of depends. It might go to ordinance committee because our town has a subcommittee of town council called the ordinance committee, which review it And then, ask questions and like figure out if this is really something that they want to pass on to then the planning board for their full review of the ordinance change, the zoning ordinance change. And then planning board will take a thorough look at it and it'll then go back to council with planning board's recommendation to approve it or to not. So the planning board themselves, they do not implement any ordinance changes, but they can make recommendations to town council, who is then responsible for implementing the ordinance change. If we were a town meeting town, zoning, any ordinance changes can only happen once a year at the town meeting. Interesting. So we are, I've done, I don't know, Bob, are you thinking my ordinance changes? Since I started, I've probably done 5.
Seems like 25, but.
And there's 4 more, but
Yes, a couple more we've done 4 times.
not all zoning.
Bridget, you do not have the slide of the map?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Oh, I thought you, okay.
I didn't have the link to the, I was gonna show you all of them, like kind of the table of contents in our code. Just to show you.
It was up on one of the browser windows. I might be wrong. Might have gone away, but. Oh, raps.
I backtracked.
Sorry about that.
So, and I'm sure the people in the room that know a little bit more history about this, but you can see in the light blue and the yellow are the big ones. And that's RR1, rural residential zone 1, rural residential zone 2. The minimum lot size in RR1 is 4 acres. So if you have 4 acres, if you have an 8-acre parcel and you want to make it 2 parcels, you would be allowed to do something like that. If you had a 7-acre parcel in an R1, you wouldn't be allowed to have any more than 1 table. R2, the minimum lot size is 2 acres. The only way I know it is RR2 is 2, so 2 acres. So those are residential districts. There's a lot going on here. But a lot of hard work went into this. A lot of, I'm assuming thoughtful discussion, maybe even some conflict for those of you who know what happened to get here. But a lot of work to figure out, like, these OCNs are office commercial. We want office commercial uses here. What does that look like? We just read it in the ordinance. What is an office commercial? Dentist office, doctor's offices, further north of Tyler Technology, something like that. Low density residential. There's just a lot here. Highway commercial, village commercial center, our town center district is in here in the purple. It's a small area. The dashed lines in here are overlay districts. So this is not complicated enough. There are other rules and regulations that sit on top of this. Overlay districts. And there's specific regulations or potentially incentives, maybe released to the underlying zones that apply for a reason. So if we go to MDR's medium density residential, I don't remember off the top of my head what the acreage is in there, but they're fairly small lots. And so they have a setback overlay. So if you want to put a shed on their lot, it wouldn't have to be, it could be closer than the underlying zone in MDR. So you can kind of see like weird. These smaller lots are in here, so they've drawn the line around the smaller lots and said, oh, these folks should be able to have a shed. But if we have to stick to say like a 75-foot setback, we're literally putting a shed in their front, in their living room. So the overlay gives relief to the underlying zone and allow you to put your shed closer to your neighbors, which makes sense. There's a bunch of other different overlay zones. They are all chapters in our zoning ordinance. And there's an overlay zoning map. Special use and special rules for fairgrounds, golf course, senior housing communities. So right out here, our Ocean View neighborhood or Cumberland Custom neighborhood got a special zoning overlay to allow for more density, more people per acre, more units to be constructed because of senior housing. We also just see some things are in place that we really cannot change. So stream protection and the shoreland zoning, that's all dictated by the state. So there are certain requirements if you live within a certain number of feet to a shoreland, and that could be, from my house along Millbrook, I'm in the shoreland zoning, from Bryan Forest, from the ocean, there's 15 down here in the blue line and the yellow around Forest Lane. Not all those rules are dictated by the state. We follow the state. And if this wasn't enough, there are also contract zoning agreements, or contract zones, or CBAs. We have about 12 or 13. This is where someone, I'll use Wander as an example, if everyone's familiar with a Wander property, where someone says, well, this is a rural residential zone, but I want to have a restaurant. And I'm not allowed to have a restaurant in a rural residential zone, but I also want to conserve this land. So I'm going to go to town council and I'm going to, have a lawyer draft up these fancy contract zoning agreements, and we're going to come up with an agreement that says I can have my restaurant and I'm going to dedicate X number of acres to conservation. So usually there's like a give and take when you're talking about a contract zone agreement. If you have anything to add, please jump in. You know more about this than I do. And the contract zone agreement, again, the process for that goes through town council and planning board. It starts in the joint meeting between planning board and town council. And then the final decision ends up with town council. And it's really just one parcel of land. We have some, let's see what else we've got. We've got Crossing Brook with a contract zone agreement. If anyone remembers that development, there was an affordability piece to it. So they got more units out of the land and agreed to do an affordability piece to that development. There are some Osgood Village and Cottage Farm are senior living, so age restricted housing, and some of those units are income restricted. So that would be the part of the contract. So we're going to allow more units, and you as a developer are going to have some of those units stay income restricted for our AD. So it's not easy. I've learned a lot, even from being living here. But it's all in place for a reason. It is complicated. And actually, Bill Longley is a super good resource. So he's really in charge of enforcing code, the ordinance, and zoning work. Questions on zoning, yeah.
Is there a short reason, explanation of the history between R1 and R2?
Yeah.
Of the difference?
Yes, what happened, I thought I explained that a couple of weeks ago, that we were looking to actually restrict growth by the thought at the time, if we had larger lot sizes. And again, this was the thought, it wasn't necessarily right or wrong, but we thought but the thing is that you couldn't arbitrarily set these things for 4 acres. You had to have a legitimate reason. So what we did to get around the state law, and this was a legal thing to restrict growth, was that we did a hydrological study of the whole town. And we did a soil study of the whole town. And we determined if the soils or a particular thing, as you folks may know or may not know, there's with the exception of a couple of the aquifers, most of the soil here in Cumberland is heavily clay, which means it doesn't percolate that well, a little more difficult as far as building septic systems. And then the other thing was, of course, hydrological as far as wetlands, the availability of water. So the areas that had the good soils and the favorable hydrological ones, we put in the RR2. And then the ones that didn't percolate and didn't have as much soils were put in the RR1. And so that was, it was done strictly as a legal way to get around growth control. Subsequent to this, so that is, and we did that, I believe, in the 90s, if not even the 80s.
89.
And so that's why we did it, when we did it. And obviously what has happened, and then the other part of it was, if it was on sewer, then it would go down to 2 acres on the RR1 and 1 acre in the RR2, which is why with the clustering. So that is why we did it. And there was an effort when we did the comprehensive plan zoning update. What was that called officially? When we looked at zones, 2014, was
The
it?
ad hoc land
Yeah.
use advisory committee.
Right. And it looked into that specifically. And the initial recommendation was to go, because now they've developed septic systems. We've got a lot of other things going on that kind of renders the soils and all that stuff relatively moot. So the recommendation initially was for the whole town to go over to 2 acres minimum. And it got to the town council, and there was a lot of lobbying by the Range Road people to the town council, and it was defeated 4-3. So we still retain the RR1 and RR2, but the initial ad hoc committee did recommend the RR2. But that's the reasoning behind it.
Thank you.
Any other questions on zoning? Specific?
What's the minimum lot size for in the MDR?
It's 2.
MDRs.
An MDR.
MDR's 2 acres.
What's it?
So in town,
My
like
computer on the internet.
on Route 9, Cumberland Center, if there was a lot
between school and North Yarmouth. It has to be 2 acres built out.
Can't be, no. You're not.
One and a half.
We're on.
There's a chart right on the Bill's page.
No, it's
I'm
1.5.
getting to it.
We're lucky.
Everything else has their 2 acres.
Maybe it's the overlay that allows the smaller.
Is that what it is?
I just think, yeah.
Exactly.
The TNT.
It's,
But that's like more.
315-8.
Minimum lot size is 20,000 square feet, so about half an acre
Wait.
Correct.
No, wait,
for MDR.
Yeah.
Right?
no, no. You're looking at section 315-8. Okay.
Yeah, MDR is 2 acres.
Where am I?
What are you thinking of, Bridget?
Medium density residential?
Yeah.
Christina's got the up in this chart.
Yeah, I got the chart.
Oh, we got
Definitely illegal.
We found the discrepancy. How we need
Maybe.
the address?
What are you looking
No, there it is. Sorry, I was in the wrong chapter.
Yeah, no, it's good.
So one thing that, just if I'm allowed to like expand on my thought, Yarmouth, just as a point of reference, has a 1 acre minimum zoning. And in kind of in planning and what I've seen kind of in neighboring towns and neighboring states, I don't know if you've seen this too, is there have been a lot of studies on non-conforming lots. So in MDR, we could probably look at that map and say we have probably 80% of MDR non-conforming lots. And a non-conforming lot is a lot size that would have existed prior to the zoning being implemented. So any, 2 acre lots that are in a 4 acre zone existed prior, probably, hopefully
Right.
existed if they're legal lots prior to the zoning. So what I've seen a lot of is just towns doing non-conforming lot studies and making their zoning actually like fit the form of what's there. Something to chew over as we get into this, because this is really just the beginning, but something that we could look at as we're thinking about zoning and what makes sense for our town.
So maybe just to pull on that, so the minimum lot size in town generally is 2 acres, unless there's some sort of exemption.
2 or 4.
2 or 4.
Okay.
That's easy. It's easy. I can remember that.
I think you really have to look at it as concede growth control, because if you look at, if you start at Fowl Avenue and you head up towards Greeley Road, you look at Fowl Avenue, Hills, Pinewood, Woodside, Hillcrest, those are all very small lots. And so, they were created in the 60s, early 70s. And then as the town grew, we said, holy cow, we gotta do something about this.
Yeah, no, it's just an understanding like that.
All right, so the property owner, you have the right to use and enjoy your property, and to do anything on your property that complies with zoning and the local ordinance. So I'm a landowner and I own 16 acres in RR1. I'm allowed by zoning ordinance to make a subdivision for lots, to subdivide my 16 acres into 4 lots and to build homes on each one of those lots. By right. So this, we'll get into this a little bit more because I will talk about planning board, but that is what planning board does. They say, does the property owner, having met all the requirements, be able to do things like a big subdivision? And if the answer is yes, there's really no stopping them. It is their right to do that. So if we want to build a business in a certain zone and it is allowed and we've met all the requirements in the zoning, then there's no reason to stop them.
And that, probably the most recent example of that was the case development up in West Cumberland with the next thing. And of course, the neighbors came out, and the planning board doesn't have that what he put in there was allowed under our zoning ordinance. And the planning board does not, under its conditions of approval, whether or not the thing that development puts kids in the school system or not. The thing is that the zoning regulations, as Bridget said, that he was within the rights of that particular zone to put in what he did.
And then I'm gonna touch on tree growth, farmland and open space, if we talked about that. And there's a map in the book there that goes through properties and show you properties that are in tree growth. Basically, there's a 10 acre minimum to put your land in tree growth, and basically that's a tax incentive or abatement, because you're taxed for your ability to grow trees and not the development potential of your land. Which is a big deal, right? Because building houses in Cumberland has been pretty lucrative. So having it reserved in tree growth is a helpful thing for landowners. And there is a penalty for removing land from tree growth, but it can happen. So tree growth land is not undevelopable land. There's just a penalty to get it out of tree growth, tax penalty. And currently there are about 2,400 acres in Cumberland that are in tree growth.
What's the total acreage of the town?
Oh, 22 acres, 22 miles per mile. That acre.
I'll do the math on that.
Do that.
Somebody's doing it.
20,000.
It'll take me a little while. He said it's 22 square mile. Okay, so I'm gonna get it slightly wrong, but we'll get it in the ballpark.
14,000 acres roughly.
Perfect. So about 58%.
And then here's the information on open space and agricultural land. So, there's no minimum lot size or amount that you can put into open space. You can sort of designate land as open space. And again, it's valued for its current use rather than its market potential. Generally, the more protections on the land, the greater the tax reduction. So if you put it into open space for perpetuity, you're protecting it, preserving it from development forever and ever. It'll be a greater incentive. The more land you have, obviously, the bigger the incentive, and you're not paying full tax rate. We have 787 acres in privately held open space. So the town owns about 1,290 acres. Some of that is in open space. I'm pretty sure this calculation is privately held open space, which would not include the town. But I don't believe that. And then agricultural land can be preserved at 5 acre minimum. It must be producing $2,000 annually from the land. You must be in sort of active agriculture production. So,
Is that including the tree growth under agriculture or no?
no, so these are all separate.
Okay.
So you can't have it, you can't be tree growth and open space or tree growth and farm. You can't combine them, one or the other.
Just farm and good livestock.
It would. Yeah, agricultural land. And so we have 550 acres in agricultural land. Now, they don't always stay in agricultural, right? and they can come out of agricultural land. They can stop producing on the land, they can help. Hold on to it, not do livestock or corn or whatever. Questions on that? The map is, I think the map is pretty helpful. It'll kind of gives you an overview. I don't just put a picture up here, but kind of gives you an overview of what we've got and where it is.
Does anybody need a book? We've got a couple more down here. We all have.
You still want to say a few.
And then I should hand this one over to you, right, Peter? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the planning board role in all this. And I guess to some extent, my role in all of this is, when we talk about commercial and residential development, there's a process to get through. And with residential development, it's a subdivision of land, which is state regulated. There's different types of subdivisions. There's major subdivision, minor subdivisions. There's different kinds of layouts to your plan, traditional. We have a conservation subdivision, clustered subdivisions. So there's a little bit more nuance, I guess, to subdivision. And then there's the commercial development, which is the site plan review. So all of these are really regulated by ordinance, subdivision regulated by the state. So I'm going to jump into site plan first. These are a little bit easier. There are 14 minimum approval criteria that the planning board reviews during the public hearing. That include things like traffic circulation and parking, noise, stormwater management, erosion control, water protection, buffering and landscaping, wastewater, where's all this stuff happening, and design standards. So in Cumberland, we have design standards that apply to Route 1, Route 100, Town Center District, and the Village Mixed Use Zone. And those are attachments to zoning ordinance, and there are pictures that say, we want buildings that have pitched roofs and shutters and square windows, and so there's certain requirements that people have to meet in those different districts as well from design standards. And the planning board is looking at sort of our standard conditions of approval for developing for commercial development. And then we're potentially looking at the design standards. So I just put one up there, that's Rusty Lasers site plan, approved site plan. The 550-page document that we get, the applications that comes in, includes really detailed stormwater analysis, all of the things, traffic, maybe a traffic study, noise, water protection, where's our buffering. So in addition to this, we would get like a separate plan that would have landscaping on it. But it's just one. This is like the parent clean mother site plan that we get. We get easily a couple dozen plans like this, and then just pages and pages of it. So the basic process is I get those, I review them to make sure that they're complete from the ordinance. They go to an engineer for review because I'm not an engineer. And they get reviewed, peer reviewed by a third party engineer. We check them against standards. I help draft those with the planning board, and then the planning board makes the final.
Is there any minimum trigger for site plan? Sorry, like size of, or 1 acre stormwater? I mean, I'm thinking Site Location and Development Act for DEP. I'm just curious.
Sure.
Hopefully.
So yeah, so there's state requirements that go into all of this. So if you're disturbing over an acre, 40,000 square feet of land and making it an impervious surface, then you need a site location development act permit through Maine Department of Environmental Protection. I didn't want to go there.
No, sorry. I was just like, what's the local?
Yeah, so in any development,
Mhm.
subdivision or site
Okay.
plan, there are those kind of considerations that have to be made. And the onus is on the applicant. So whoever is doing the development and wants to do this has to submit with all of the proper authorities and show us evidence that they've done that and that they've received the permit. So we require a historical and archaeological review, review where the wetlands are, wetland disturbances, and there's a slew of permits that can go along with wetlands, including from the Corps of Engineers. But we've got one development right now being held up by an archaeological study. Because the state said, oh, there's evidence that a blacksmith used to be there, we have to dig. Find out if there's any historical archaeological features. So you can't develop that right now. Traffic movement, so right now the school is working with the Department of Transportation on a traffic movement permit because of the volume and the predictions and with this big updated development, we gotta go in and update everything with all of the Department of Transportation, environmental protection and all that. So site plan is something that it has the potential to be seen, reviewed and heard in the public hearing setting of the planning board and approved in one meeting. Generally speaking, it doesn't happen that way. Usually, it takes a couple meetings or a site visit and a meeting. There are all public notice, which means we send notifications out to the butters within 500 feet of development and put them in the newspaper.
President, I just wanted to comment that site plan review is for commercial,
Right.
whereas subdivision review is for residential, so that they don't overlap, they serve two different purposes altogether. The other point I just wanted to make, was that if you buy an undeveloped lot of land for the purpose of building a house, then the size of the lot has to be in accordance with a minimum lot size for that particular zone. But there is no planning board review or subdivision review if you build a single home.
Yeah.
So if you take any given year, there's a certain number of new homes that are built in Cumberland. Some are in subdivisions, which occasionally get kind of bad rap, but others are not, and they're simply single family construction. Ironically, although the homes in subdivisions or subdivisions themselves get the bad rap, the level of administrative review is much more intense than for a single family home, which basically just has to pass you get your electrical permit, your plumbing permit, your perk test and all the rest of it. But a whole lot less review than a subdivision would entail.
Do you have to be in alignment with the design standards of that zone?
No.
For a single family?
For a house?
I was just wondering if we're talking about, Bridget mentioned shutters, right? So if someone buys a lot in the TCD, which has, very specific design standards and builds something that's
Oh, I
like
see what you're
wildly
saying.
modern and doesn't, you know
Yeah,
what I
I
mean?
think-
Like, is there any oversight on that
There's there's no standards for residential.
for residential?
Design standard that constitutes a commercial. The design standard idea in an ordinance is really just applicable to commercial.
Right. So you've got the
Right.
Route 100 design standards and the Route 1 design standards, both areas of which are purely commercial.
Whereas in some communities, like Nantucket, right, is known for only gray or white or something, right?
Gray and white and a lot of those flowers, blue and white.
Hydrangeas.
Hydrangeas, yes, yeah, plenty of those.
But we also have the town, which I think is in our purview at some point, that we also have growth measures as far as the number of housing units that can be built in the year. And I believe the last, Bob, you're better than I am on this, but I think in the early 2000s, we set a limit, let's say of around 50.
55.
And we were part of Shabig at that time. And I think there were 3 allowed over there, and all of a sudden it triggered a land rush in Shabig just because of their particular thing. But the interesting thing and the other thing is that 55 and older housing is exempt. So we have never in the history since we've done that reached the 50 in 1 year. Like Ocean View, for instance, 110 units over there. They're exempt. That condominium condominium complex next to Tyler Technologies in Yarmouth was all built 55 and over. So as we look at things along the way, we do have a limitation of 50, but have never used it.
For the apartments on Route 1, are those considered in that?
Yeah, they were, that was a contract zone, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so in a contract zone, basically it's the Wild West that the council basically sets the rules in a contract zone. And those houses that Dave Chase built and the apartment things were in that contract zone. So as Bridget has said, that came under a different set of rules.
But that multi-family housing, though, that multiple apartments, so that would be just one permit to that anyway, probably. So, or is the building permit based on density?
One building
I
permit
think it is one building.
with 45 dwelling units.
Up to $45,
For that particular site have 45 dwelling units.
but it was one building permit, so.
Building permit,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure how we tracked it. Bill Longley tracks those, and the ordinance gives him some leeway to pull forward from a year ahead and to catch up and pull from backward. Like he could pull from 2024 if we didn't hit our allotment. It gives him a certain percentage.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter because the council just puts a contract zone in and gets away with it anyway, so.
If that is,
George Turner always hated contract zones.
Me too.
And, you know, that was pretty vocal about.
Yeah.
That's how we ended up with the town center zoning.
Exactly.
George's insistence of a couple other councils too, and that's how that came out.
But you're right, you can borrow, if you haven't used all of the particular year, you can borrow in the second year, I believe.
so like the Mineral Springs development, that's 72 units. It's gonna happen over 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
To the state, I think we have 20 building permit issued. We'll just keep tracking it.
Okay.
So that site plan, which is commercial development, and then we talked a little bit about this. Subdivisions are governed by a Maine state statute, so anything that we have in our ordinance should be basically an exact replica of the state statute. If it's not in our ordinance, we still have to comply to the state statute. It's almost easier to say what is not a subdivision and what is subdivision. But a subdivision is a division of a tract or parcel of land into 3 or more lots within any 5-year period. So that would be that could be 2 splits. One split, create 3 lots, or more than that. What is not a subdivision is a single division of land into 2 lots every 5 years. So you have your 16-acre lot in RR1. You can break off one 4-acre lot every 5 years and never go through subdivision review.
Yeah.
A division to transfer ownership to an abutter. If you have a neighbor that says, oh, I'd really like to buy a piece of your property, the 4 acres from you, or it can be less because they would retain ownership under their parcel. You can divide, sell to an abutter, and that does not constitute subdivision. You could sell off to a lot of abutters at the same time.
But you can't create a non-conforming lot by subdivision, by transfer. You can't make your lot smaller
You
than.
can't make your lot smaller. Yeah, all at the same time, you have to make money.
What about the, piece of property going to the abutter? Can that be less than what is required in the zone?
Yes, as long as you don't decrease your lot
Okay.
to less than the underlying zoning.
A gift to a municipality or a person related to the landowner. So I could split my 16-acre lot into 4 lots in basically one swoop. If I give 1 parcel to my son, 1 parcel to my other son, and 1 parcel to my. Now, can't sell any of those split lots for 5 years. They have to be held basically in that ownership for 5 years. Okay, so there's some weird nuances to subdivision. But basically that's the high level. Then I do here. I do, here's the 15-acre lot, what's that? Then RRQ though. Okay, so here, I just wanted to show you the difference between a traditional subdivision and a cluster or conservation subdivision. In RR1 and RR2, the yellow and blue on our map, the town of Cumberland prefers a conservation subdivision. It's not a written requirement, but anyone coming to create a subdivision in RR1 or RR2 is required to submit a conservation subdivision plan. They may choose also to submit a traditional subdivision plan, and then it falls on the planning board to decide which is the best suited for that result. So a traditional subdivision is take the 16 acres, and here we're in RR2, so we have 2-acre minimum lot size. Take 16 acres divided by 2, you can have 2-acre lots. You can have 8 2-acre lots. There's a little bit of there can get a little bit tricky when we're talking about wetlands and things like that, but I didn't want to go there.
Right.
So our conservation subdivision, we still have our 16-acre lot in R2. We have a 2-acre minimum lot size, which leaves us with our underlying zone allowing us to have 8 lots. But 50% must be held in conservation or open space or transfers to the town. So that allows us to have 8 1-acre lots in a subdivision. Because that conservation subdivision is allowing you to build the same amount of units, serving half the land, and it's sort of giving you that path to having to meet the underlying zoning requirements. Oh yeah, here it is. So 50% open space can be owned by the homeowners association with restrictions. It can be given to the town council has to approve that. Or it can be placed into a conservation easement. There are specific things that people go like. We use a conservation subdivision. There are specific things that that other 50% can be used.
Bridget, sorry if this is a bit of a rabbit hole, but in our conservation example, you have 8 acres of what appears to be wetland that the town or might own. is there any requirement to kind of endow the maintenance of it? Because 8 acres of wetland is not gonna have timber or agricultural value. And if HOA offloads it, they're not on the hook. So is there thought in ordinance about where that burden goes?
Well, initially the burden goes on the subdivider, on the landowner, and would go into HOA documents. So the maintenance of that land, if there's any, if we're talking about any like detention ponds or stormwater management systems, will go to the HOA, and then they would have to submit an ask for the town to take that. So the town would then, upon review of the land, look at what are the maintenance requirements, and do we want to keep that burden or privilege, however it looks, right? If this subdivision is happening right next to Stone Brook, a little bit more enticing for town council to sort of take ownership of that land and piece it together to make larger contiguous property. Of open space, recreation area, you can put trails, you're allowed to put trails in open space. For subdivisions, that kind of thing. It's less intriguing if it's out, kind of disconnected to any other town land. So I think it depends.
Makes sense. It's implied that it's in the process. Thank you.
I mean, I haven't been on town council, but I would think your acceptance of land really depends. Everything's a little different. So anything that,
Critical habitat too,
Yeah.
vernal pools, something like that, the town would want to make sure that's preserved, so, even though I think it's worthless land, a lot of, species use those wetlands, so.
I didn't mean useless as this. I just meant non-income producing. I mean, it's useful for habitat and other things, but it would be on a financial perspective, it's going to be an expense, not a revenue generator. Even if it's got a lot of other good things going.
and that open space doesn't have a tax burden. So when it goes to the HOA, the tax burden really falls to the residents who are part of that, who have access to that open space. So the HOA isn't, my understanding of it, the HOA doesn't tax on open space land, it's just inherent in the value of it.
So by definition, then a conservation subdivision would have to have an HOA.
Unless they did it to the. Yeah, they would, because just governing the regular regulations, they'd have to have one, but. And if the town took that over, they would still have to have an HOA to set all the rules.
And, oftentimes subdivisions, the road is also the big piece.
Yeah.
The town doesn't always take care of all the roads. There's a lot of private, streets in towns, and so a subdivision. That's how to pay for the road maintenance.
So it could be your HOA is simply road maintenance, so plowing, paving,
Yeah.
and that's it.
Or it could be simply open space management, are we, the last thing I want to say is that the site plan and subdivisions. 3 lots or more, go to the planning board for their review and approval, and upon the planning board, approval. Anyone has 30 days to go to Superior Court to appeal the decision. The planning board decisions are appealed at the court level. I am given some leeway in the ordinances to approve small things, the commercial development wants to put in a shed. I have the authority in the ordinances to do that. My decisions are appealable to the planning board, within 30 days. We notice all the butters for any of the developments and any of my decisions. We notice those, they get sent postcards, so it's not done in a vacuum. It's very open public process. All of it, all public record, all the time, and anytime you go into a planning board agenda, you can see it all the thing. That we do. What else?
Planning board decisions can't be overruled by the council.
Planning board decisions cannot be overruled by the council. The planning board is like a like a semi
Okay.
quasi judicial board. So really, they interpret the ordinances and decide yes or no, the development applies to the ordinance.
Yeah, we cannot be, in other words, if you don't like what, Tig and Bob are doing, you could, or something is coming up, you can email them, you can call them and everything. You cannot, lobby, call, or contact a planning board member. If we get some kind of correspondence, we immediately send it to the town planner. She, makes copies of it for the planning board member, and it also becomes part of the meeting. So if somebody's doing something next door, you can't get on the phone and call me. We can't go out and look at a property. We'll say if they're gonna do a development, we can't do a walkthrough of the property. It has to be, any kind of a site walk has to be done as kind of part of an official meeting. There's minutes, and there's all things that are done. So it's quasi judicial, and we cannot be lobbied.
People try.
People
But
We
we
had
let,
We
we let Bridget know.
had a planning board member, I mean, just on the stand, he's like, I just don't like that color. And that's great, right? That's fine. You're allowed to have an opinion, but it couldn't sway his decision. Because at the end of the day, the color didn't
But we get,
matter, you know, like, so those kind of things, like if he doesn't agree with the development and it meets all the ordinances, it still, has to be approved.
that's the thing that we've tried to do over the last 2 years, is explain right at the beginning of the planning board meeting that we only have jurisdiction over, well, it used to be 17 conditions of approval that Bridget talked about, and the state has added 5 more, so I guess 22. And that's the only, when we went into the site plan of the high school, right at the first part of it, we said, we have no control on telling who rides the school bus. We have no control as to what high school kid parks where in the thing. And we have no control other than in the conditions. The turf field has been approved, so we can't go against the turf field. It has to meet standards. And so a lot of people really don't understand it, and they try to, insert stuff outside our thing, the proverbial kids in the school system. That's always a popular one. But again, we don't have control over that. So it is just within the conditions of approval. But my experience has been over the last 3 different times I've been on the board, major issues are drainage, buffering, the next door neighbor, erosion control, traffic. Those are the 4 major ones. And a lot of these developments can get tripped up on one of these 3, especially we have the power to make them make changes to their plan. A good example that the truck is going to use a right of way to go to to bring, do excavations and everything for the new elementary school. Well, the 2 neighbors said there's no buffering, there's no control over this thing. So we made the last 2 changes we made at the meeting were to require the contractor to do these 2 particular things. So we do have, if there's something reasonable, if somebody's got a legitimate ditch, we do work to mitigate those things. So it's very important to understand what we can do and what we can't do. But we can initiate we can initiate ordinances. And I think we've become more active since Richard has come aboard, and there's just a lot of stuff that's kind of gone on, that hidden under rocks. So as Bridget uncovers the stuff under the rocks, we're making changes to the ordinance. So the council is seeing a lot more stuff, but that's all within the purview of you guys with the comprehensive plan to change this if you want to.
Well, I went way longer than I thought.
I mean, there's a lot. We're in it now. Like, does anybody want to, like, are we all still cool going down this path? Like, it's a rabbit hole. I mean, it's really exciting. But yeah. And there's no better transition than that, though, to the Growth Management Act and how it ties to comprehensive planning. So I would suggest, if there are no questions, are there more questions? Do you feel free to like stand up and stretch? But we'll get right into the Growth Management Act.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So we tried to spice it up for you a little bit, please. And so this, I don't know if anybody's aware of this painting. It's in Boston. It's by Paul Gauguin, and the questions scrawled into the corner, and the title of it are, where do we come from, what are we, and where are we going? And you might remember that Paul and I had a similar phrasing in terms of where are we, where do we want to go, and how do we get there? So in the spirit of that, let's get right into it, but have some illustrations along the way too. So why are we doing comprehensive planning, and why does the Growth Management Act sort of make requirements about it? The benefit of doing a comprehensive plan, and that process is specified by the Growth Management, is that it enables a town to have zoning and land use restrictions. So all of that fun stuff that we've just delved into, all of that can only be implemented and enforced by a town if it's gone through a comprehensive plan process that those land uses and zoning restrictions are based on. So this process is empowering the community to consider its needs and resources and enact appropriate land use laws and regulations to fulfill that vision. It also, the Growth Management Act specifically enables things like rate of growth ordinances we were talking about before, impact fees. It's the first step to let a municipality make these decisions about how it's going to grow. According to the statute, it also ostensibly helps sort of bump communities to the top of the line for like state grants and funding. That maybe is less of a consideration nowadays, but this is something you might have noticed as you were perusing through the Growth Management Act. So going back to Gauguin's questions, one of the things that the Growth Management Act heavily talks about and really makes explicit is that as part of a comprehensive plan, a community needs to be doing inventory and analysis of very particular things. These are laid out. They're slightly paraphrased here, but the intent is the same. Economic and demographic data, natural resources, so we were just talking about wetlands and critical habitat areas, productive land, so things like agriculture and timber, housing stock, the existing land use, so the zoning, water resources like aquifers or shoreland areas, marine resources. So there's some emphasis on maintaining access to the ocean, especially for like traditional sea-based industries, open space and recreation, historic resources to Bridget's anecdote about the blacksmith site. So in knowing and understanding where those are and how this site impacts, future development, and then also public facilities and services. So all of these, and we're gonna touch on this later, so we get a little bit more involved song and dance. There are specific requirements of how you go about doing that. The Growth Management Act itself just says you need to take these things into consideration. You need to inventory and consider. So ostensibly, ideally, I think we can succeed in this together. All of those inventories and analyses are going to inform, okay, where are we going with this? How are we going to get there? And there's a couple of things that the Growth Management Act specifically lays out to help you answer those questions. One is that it says that the town must identify growth areas and or rural areas. So growth areas where development is expected and desired to occur, and rural areas that are intended for preservation. There's an option to include transition areas that are sort of betwixt and between, and those are sort of optional. There's a little asterisk next to growth areas because there is technically a series of exceptions that you can take so that you don't have to designate a growth area. It does happen, but generally, as communities develop and grow, if they have a traditional village downtown, if they have been having folks come in and develop land, generally that's all been people. Then those growth areas and rural areas, the sort of decision of how do we want to develop and what do we want to stay the same? What is the interaction between those things? That is what is supposed to be directly informing the land use policy, so specifically the zoning code. And so the zoning code should be informed by a tremendous amount of thought and efforts that has gone in, and obviously it's been iterative over, I think you said 1949. But the comprehensive plan is supposed to inform land use policies, and land use policies are supposed to be in concert with the comprehensive plan. There's also another specific requirement in the Growth Management Act that's a capital investment plan should be coming out of this process. So essentially thinking about, okay, you inventory all of these assets and all of these resources. You considered like where you want to grow and where you want to preserve. What are sort of the infrastructure needs and decisions and investments that are going to need to happen to get there? There's a little bit of an overlap for the folks on City Council. Like obviously, often councils do like a capital infrastructure or capital improvements plan. So this is separate in the sense of towns will often do a very specific set of line items that say this is what we're going to spend money on in the next 5 years. This is broader. This is saying how can we realize this vision? What is the community going to have to invest in and to be aware of moving forward? And then, sadly, the state goals, there's too much text, so I wasn't able to include a picture. But another thing is that you all are supposed to be promoting state goals through your comprehensive plan. You're not allowed to be going against state mandated goals because Cumberland decided, actually, we want to go this way instead. There's certain parameters that you're following within. So what are
Christian,
yes,
a question for you.
please.
We have already adopted 3 specific growth areas. And for those of you who have the map binders, it's the map under tab 4 for reference. And as you know, having looked at our zoning map, we have 2 rural residential districts, substantial in size. Is the fact that we have called them rural residential districts sufficient to meet the state required designation of rural areas?
I would not be inclined to believe so. No, I think that there would need to be, and I should caveat this with the fact that I am not a lawyer, and some of you may be. So if anybody is a lawyer, please do make yourself available to us. I think above the name, the nomenclature of it, there would have to be sort of reasoning and discussion of, what do we want our community to develop into? What do we want it to look like? No, I don't think that would be a sufficient threshold, for sort of, having a inclusive conversation of, does that sort of meet that bar?
Okay.
So the state goals, I'm just gonna read through some paraphrases really quick, just so we're all on the same page. Orderly growth and development in appropriate areas of each community and region while still protecting the state's rural character. Efficient system of public facilities and services to accommodate anticipated growth and economic development. An economic climate which increases job opportunities and overall economic well-being. Affordable, decent housing opportunities for all Maine citizens. Policies that assess community needs and environmental effects of municipal regulations, lessen the effects of excessive parking requirements, and allow reuse of upper floors. That's sort of a fascinatingly specific and agglomerated one. And then there are a series that talk about protecting, safeguarding, preserving natural areas, habitats, resources. Now, you may notice that some of these things are sort of inherently in tension with one another. That is the complication of moving forward in a society that is developing and growing and figuring it out together. Orderly development sounds good, but what does that mean in terms of, where, how much, what impacts that's allowed to have on the town? Certainly, one of the things that I talked about was housing for all Maine residents. But also not unfettered, developing willy-nilly. There's a tension always between these things. And so it's a balance, and it's meant to be hard, it's meant to be complicated, and that's why we're going through this process. Last little bit of overall sort of what's going on here. There used to be a state planning office, and that state planning office was tasked with overseeing the development of comprehensive plans and reviewing comprehensive plans. The state planning office is no more, and so that responsibility has fallen to the Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, DACF, which has a wide purview, and one of them is reviewing the growth or reviewing comprehensive plans submitted by communities for consistency with their growth. And now we're going to get into, this is my Q&A call. It's all just slightly ominous intentionally. So because, and hopefully some of you have been able to sort of page through the Growth Management Act, and I actually brought a physical copy. That's a little bit easier if anybody wants to look through. It's a pretty reasonably sized document. It's like, I want to say 15 pages of statute. It's like in sort of tone and vibe similar. I've obviously summarized it a little bit, but it's generally saying these things. You should consider this and this to produce, a land use sort of vision, and you need to follow state goals. And there's, it's sort of policy neutral and pretty open-ended about how you might accomplish that. At some points, with any sort of statute that is created like that, there needs to be sometimes follow-up from state departments that sort of provide rule making. So State Department will say, okay, we've been tasked with this law and enforcing it and implementing it. What are sort of and then they get to essentially make rules to make that an objective process. A long time ago, the State Planning Office, which no longer exists, created the current set of rules. I'm pretty sure I'm getting the history right there, which the DACF inherited and now sort of oversees. And the DACF has a checklist, which Paul has copies of, and which he will be handing out. That is really great in that it's extremely objective. And that is the nicest thing that I will say. Because it sets the requirements for what you all must produce in your comprehensive plan, but it does it in a very particular way that says, here's what you're going to do in your inventory. Here's what policies you're going to have to address. And it dictates a lot of what has to happen. So it also touches on, you have to have a vision statement. You have to talk about the sort of way you want to develop, talk about those development areas and preservation areas. But it ends up that a large portion of the work that has to be done as mandated by the state are sort of these inventories of what you have and processing that information and coming out with policies that Cumberland is endorsing and aligns with the state. And I just acknowledge this because it is not the most fun part of the comprehensive plan process. The most fun part is saying, who are we? Where do we want to go? How do we get there? And so you can lean on Paula and I a lot. You all are our boss. But we would not be giving you or helping you develop a state approvable comprehensive plan if we don't get into the weeds on all of these particular inventories and checklists that we're going to need to get through. I don't know if there are questions before Paul gets into his checklist. Please.
As I was listening, I was working in the back of my mind, and I'm thinking about different communities. And I'm a builder, and I build in different communities. And I wonder, whether the whole process is somewhat flawed, because you take Portland, and then you take Cumberland, and then you take Poland. Poland doesn't have any room for growth in a large sense. I mean, there's no really vacant lands. There's no, we can put a couple more high rises in there, and Cumberland's kind of in that middle. And then you take these communities that are outliers, and they have no need for a subdivision because they get tons of land and nobody's fighting over it. It's just rural. And so I'm just curious, as we go through this exercise, where does the state differentiate between a community of 55,000, a community of 10,000, a community of 3,000?
So a simple answer to that question is every community, many communities are going to be regulating in different ways. So there are certain communities that might not do site plan review. They have to follow the rules of subdivision because that's a state mandated law. And within site plan review, different communities might have different thresholds for it. They might have different triggers for what needs to be reviewed when. So there is some level of discretion within a community as to the capacity that they have and the appetite they have for regulating changes. There are certain things, as Bridget mentioned, that are sort of like, you have to be enforcing shoreline zoning, you have to be enforcing subdivision. But there is some level of flexibility, which speaks to, I think I'm getting to the crux of your question, which speaks to what is our community value? What do we want to emphasize and prioritize? How can we make sure that happens here? Am I getting to the heart of your question? I'm not sure.
I think so. I'm not sure the state really understands what they're doing at some level too.
Well, that's a given. So
Just confirm, is it the trigger for needing a comprehensive plan is having zoning?
So having a comprehensive plan that is approved by the state allows you to have them.
There are plenty of smaller municipalities that don't have zoning. who wouldn't be, have requirements under Growth Management Act, simply because they don't have zoning.
So they just don't file a comprehensive plan.
They don't need to
They don't
file
need-
a comprehensive plan. You can,
Skip that one.
you don't have zoning.
And
Didn't
then
that
also within that,
happen?
you
Yeah,
can't
right.
say this can't go here and this can't go here according to the thoughts and desires of our community that we've, decided to regulate because of X, Y, and Z. So there is a benefit from going through all of this work. It is there's a lot of work and there's a lot of consideration that goes into it.
I think what the real crux of it is the state has goals. And they may be meaningful to us, but for a large part of the state, those goals don't mean anything.
I will acknowledge, hopefully, I think there's a lot of flexibility within these state goals. Again, it's sort of policy and value neutral, in terms of what is appropriate areas of each community and region mean, what is anticipated growth and economic development. I think it lets you have a lot of flexibility, but certainly, we're not going to advise you to say, actually, Cumberland's goal is disorderly growth and, in inappropriate areas. So hopefully with each community that chooses to pursue this path, there is a area of conformance to these that community can sort of follow and get behind. So they're pretty well.
So Christian, I'll ask you this question because I'm not sure what's on Paul's agenda. And I'll warn you, it's a legal question. The question is whether we are required to get state approval of the plan that we come up with. And what I'm looking at is section 4347-A of the act, if that rings a bell. It says that if you choose to do a plan and you get a state grant to help you do the plan, you must submit it. On the other hand, if you choose to do a plan and there's no state grant involved, you may submit to the state. So we have no grant money. Are we required to submit what we come up with to the state?
I feel like I'm going to call a friend on that one.
You can phone a friend.
I'll ask our attorney on staff. I mean, I'll ask.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear.
I'll put it down as my homework.
Yeah.
What's the,
Okay, section 4347-A.
We're going right into the weeds.
well, no, it's actually, that's what we have something on retainer for, so. It's a new pen, I mean, 4347
A.
dash A, all right.
Okay.
The language of May, right? Yep.
Yep.
I got it. I'll turn it over by mid next week for you guys, so.
But don't rush it. We're not quite done yet.
Yep. Fair.
Are there any additional questions, thoughts, conversation points? I feel like Paul got a handout.
Yeah, can you just talk a little bit more about some of the grants that become eligible? I know you just mentioned the planning grants, but are there others and what sort of grants?
So that, I tried to, I think in the original intent of the statute, I think there was a sense that there would be maybe more of a opportunity for specific funding across a variety of measures. I'm hypothesizing here. I wasn't there when it was written. My impression has been that has been less of a driver in the last decade and a half of comprehensive plan development in the state of Maine. Resources are tight, and I think it's, so you'll see that it's in the Growth Management Act language that you want to have a state approved plans that you are eligible for these grants, so you can be competitive for them. I also could imagine a situation in which if the state wanted to, and I'm hypothesizing here, maybe they could give a town a harder time if they wanted to. Again, I don't think that is as much of the emphasis right now, as to why to do it. But I can reach out to some colleagues at the, DACF and see how, how hard they come down, if you decide to play it back.
All right, I'm gonna go, because we want to get to the next agenda, item, right? 'Cause you guys, and the state comes up with different grants, different years, different budget cycles, right? So it's also a placeholder for them to say, oh, hey, if we're gonna do X, Y, and Z, let's tie that to the comp plan, right? So I think the realistic practical answer is, it depends on the year, the cycle, and the budget. I don't have much to present, that's the good news. I have the checklist. So we thought it was important just to print out the whole checklist. So the teacher in me has printed out the checklist. There's not a lot of formatting, and it's on draft paper, so I didn't try to make this pretty or professional. I meant this to like you guys mark it up with your pen, just a working packet for you. Things to consider is, Chris and I talked about is just the things to start mulling over is how much of a role would you, the committee or subcommittees have in actually crafting the actual content versus dictating to us how much content we will produce. I also took this checklist, and the first page right here is a suggestion of 8 subcommittees. That is not a reflection on you or Cumberland. That's me working with the checklist saying these are what the 8 subcommittees could be. 8's probably too many for you guys, so butcher it. It's not anything, nothing more than brainstorming. And then on the second page, I try to dump like 3 things in the checklist I thought like could be staff heavy. So if you said, okay, GPCOG, go do the regional collaboration because that's what we do and you don't want to spend time on it, we'll do most of it. Of course, you guys would approve it, but there's 3 suggestions that could be staff heavy. So again, 8 suggestions of subcommittees, strictly from the checklist, not from Cumberland or your zoning or your skill sets, just from the checklist. The checklist itself, spend time on it, mull it over. What I do know is this is optional, right? So one of the things as a committee you could decide in the coming weeks is, are we going to adopt the checklist as the structure that we work in, right? And then so if we agree that that is, then Chris and I will hold you to the checklist at all times, right? So those are just considerations on why you have it. But again, it's ugly by design. I want you to write on it, take notes. If something pops in your head, or if you like something, highlight it. Something triggers, a certain thing that's happened in town, or something you want to look at the old comp plan. These are all good exercise for the checklist. Yeah.
Question, have you dealt with any other towns that are in a school district? Because thinking of capital plans and infrastructure, where we as a town don't have control over the school.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yet there are infrastructure and other things, traffic and all that thing are related.
Yeah.
How does that play out?
So I personally haven't, but we have as an agency. So I'll go do I'll take that back as homework as well to see how does that translate into the comprehensive plan?
Right.
Right. Yeah, totally agree.
But that is all
Yeah.
part of the context that you are considering for your community.
Yeah.
And so it's, within the purview
Yeah.
of what you're able to be thinking about and considering.
Well, we consider, but we have no control.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about like capital improvement, when you get to the capital improvement part of it, there's probably a way to acknowledge that.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll figure that out. I think that's a relatively, straightforward mechanism, but.
I don't know, we haven't thought of, really, Steve, with Bob, as far as I know, we've never really, it's really never come up. And the other comprehensive plans, I think.
It hasn't, and the surveys have never asked
Yeah.
school-related questions.
Yeah,
You get into that area, and it's like hitting the tar baby. You're
yeah,
just stuck.
yeah. Yeah, I think if we can avoid it, it would be good.
It's a real swamp.
You're just going to ignore 70% of the budget?
This isn't
We
budget.
have no control over it.
70% of the impact on the town, let me rephrase it. Of course, we have control over it.
We don't,
We don't.
no, the it's by state law.
Yeah.
The SAD Board of Directors has control over school expenditures.
I don't disagree with that, but we're not necessarily married to the fact that we have to be a district either.
No, but we're not planning for dissolution.
Why not? Why?
That's not our charge.
Well-
That's not our responsibility. There's no movement afoot, to my knowledge, to go in that direction.
So
If
we're
the
doing a
council has
comprehensive
heard
plan
anything
for
different,
27%
let me
of
know.
our town. That's
Well, it's 20% of the budget.
budget, correct.
Yeah.
So that's a very fundamentally different thing
Right.
than the town.
Yeah.
Yeah, this question really
That's
would live in
expenditure versus-
the financial and the CIP, which I think we can come up with a reasonable framework. for that.
But if you're gonna ask questions of folks like, do you want more open space? Do you want more? Do you want to expand the library? Do you want to spend money on X, Y, and Z? I mean, Bob has already said this is aspirational and we shouldn't ask them how they want to pay for it. How are we not asking them how they pay for it when it's literally, they have control of 27% of the budget? You know what I'm saying?
No,
It's like,
no,
I don't know
I
how
get it.
housing impacts the school district. Everything impacts the school district. And we've heard since 1964, when the school district came in, we can't do anything about that percent of the budget. We only have control over 27%. Bill said that literally every single budget. How do we plan for the future of a town
Good question.
when you don't have control over, like, all of these decisions that we're making, or Peter is saying we don't have the ability to make because we can't talk about the impact on the school. How are we planning anything? Like, how is anything that we're doing here anything more than aspirational? If we can't have any input into the direction of the town.
Yeah, maybe there's way, but as you think about it, and I think this is part of the reason that they structured the growth ordinances and
Yeah.
the way they did was exactly that, to limit the growth, which prevented the increase in the school district, right? And kept the loading in the town kind of within the ability of the school district. I get what you're saying, but I think it's
Well, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing a little bit too, because I'm also thinking, okay, well, it's as you've been suppressing growth for the past 3, 4, 5 decades, you're also suppressing the tax base. And so you have fewer landowners available to pay for the school system. So there's a pro and a con for sure with the less growth. But I don't think at the time that people were thinking about the con. With lower growth. They haven't suppressed growth. The town of Cumberland has expanded number of households by 20% decade over decade. And I'm sure this decade easily will meet by 20%, if not more. So they haven't suppressed growth. They've limited growth to wealthy individuals who can own 2 or 4 acres of land, apparently. But you look at Yarmouth has had 1% household growth compared to Cumberland's 20%. So we're not limiting our growth, we're limiting the type of growth. You can disagree on that, but I think the reality is that if we hadn't put those rules into place in the early 70s or what have you, then the tax burden would not feel so intense maybe at this point in time. That's just one of the decision points where I feel like, and I get it, like back then, there was not nearly as much demand. And I think that we are seeing in the last 10 years, really unprecedented demand on property in Cumberland. And I just don't think that goes down anytime soon. I think the secret's out. And I think that more and more people are going to want to live here, especially as more and more places in the country become uninhabitable for certain types of people. And so I just think that we're fooling ourselves if we don't think that pressure isn't going to get worse and worse and worse over time. So I'm just saying that there's a downside of, impact to saying every lot has to be 4 acres. It's kind of absurd.
But if all we can control is Greeley Road is no longer 4 acres. There now, let's make it an acre on Greeley Road. We're gonna preserve Greeley Road.
I
If
think,
we're not coming up with a way to control what goes on those 1 acres, we end up with 4 McMansions instead of 1 McMansion on 4 acres. Like, it's still not gonna make Cumberland affordable.
No, I mean, I guess where I disagree is if that we had been developing a little bit more, like not suppressing growth, which I believe we have done. If we had been developing a little bit more steadily, I think we would see just more available units. And so we have a shortage all across Maine, but in Cumberland, for sure, we have a shortage of housing units, full stop. And we do not meet the, standard for having a wide variety of different types of units, different size units. Like, we do not have a lot of density when it comes to housing at all. We have that tiny little MDR is what we consider dense housing in Cumberland. So, I just think that we've created the situation. And so, as far as the school is concerned, I get really, I'm sure everybody gets tired of the arguments every single time. How many kids is this gonna add to the school system? How many? Well, okay, then you're just gonna continue to have this really wealthy old people living here. So.
yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points, and I think that's the way the direction of this comprehensive plan has to go is, and we have to make sure that we ask the citizenry the right questions to get, not to get the right answers, that's manipulating the data. But if we make sure we ask the right questions and we encourage people to think about their responses out of the potential of this comprehensive plan could be a limitation on housing of $1 million plus and a encouragement of housing that is dense and affordable. And so, those are hard choices to make, and you have to make sure you ask the right questions. And so I just started.
You do that when Peter says they can build
Let me
whatever
finish
they
what-
want, and you said that.
I didn't hear what you said, but let me finish what I said. I just started a group with Falmouth, Yarmouth, and North Yarmouth and Cumberland. How we can share shared services, and it's a great concept because out of those shared services, there has to be the willingness for people to talk about things that they're uncomfortable about. And right out of the gate, guy from Yarmouth is very uncomfortable about talking about his police department. And the folks from North Yarmouth are uncomfortable with something else, but the desire for us to at least sit down and start to have that conversation leads us to able to say, maybe there's something that we can do. And ultimately, we have to talk about schools. We have to expand our comfort zone and realize that, there are needs in this greater community. And affordable housing is paramount to that. When we talk about, we want to have firefighters and policemen and teachers and the folks that work up the food stop and, to live in our community, then it becomes incumbent upon us to change, what Peter and I 30 years ago looked at, what this community looked like and we wanted to put some controls on it. The landscape looked a lot different.
We're gonna have to think outside the box.
Yeah.
On a lot of topics.
Yeah.
That have been kind of rolling along comfortably for years. And
Yeah.
now I don't disagree with you. We are where we are. And now what is the vision? Where are we going and how are we gonna get there?
Let me just make one comment on the use of the term aspiration. It doesn't mean that you're spinning your wheels and wasting your time. For example, if you go back to the 09 plan, it said, we have a goal of establishing growth areas in the town. That was done. It also said that we have a goal of establishing or obtaining coastal access. That was done. a lot of things that were listed as goals in the plan were in fact accomplished at the time. So think of it that way. These are things which can be done
Yeah.
in due time, not
Yeah.
necessarily overnight, but it's more than just wishful thinking.
Yeah.
Question. This might be for, Paul and Christian. So when we talk about shared services and we talk, or shared spaces, right? So for example, we share the library with North Yarmouth. And so how do we, so we as a, we could say, the community may come back and say, we want to expand the library. But in order to do that, that's also going to require actual buy-in from North Yarmouth. And so as we talk about, from a budgetary perspective, so do you have any kind of understanding, or how should we be factoring in how other communities, especially from a budgetary perspective, do you know what I'm saying? Like they're like this could be our goal, but if North Yarmouth isn't on board with that, then what does that mean for our plan? And does that get included in the plan? Like what's kind of the strategy behind that?
So it is interesting because there is actually some language towards shared resources in the Growth Management Act and sort of taking that into account. And if you, this is more of a nerding out situation, if you wanted to, you could actually do a multi-municipal plan with Yarmouth. So like you can actually, you can do that. It is allowed in statute. But I think from an advising and thinking about how to be constructive and proactive with it. If you are getting the sense that Cumberland isn't interested in sharing services, doesn't want to do that, then that is a vision that can be moved towards, as we were saying. If the thinking is that that is a positive, then certainly acknowledging that and acknowledging how that can continue and can be improved or move forward. Like it's all context to everything else. Like nothing, almost nothing won't matter to the context of what you're doing. But it all gets filtered down into what is the will of Cumberland.
And the
So I,
other
and I
communities.
guess I'd add to that is, there's nothing stopping you from saying, hey, we want to expand our library, right? So if you read the so if you look at the handout, if you look at the second page of the handout, the three major points of new regional coordination: identify and manage shared resources, collaborating with neighboring towns on cross-border issues, and documenting regional planning efforts. So you as a committee in Cumberland can say, we know we want to expand our library, right? It could be a separate side project that me and Christian, or we take two of you and just talk to North Yarmouth and say, hey, by the way, we're including this, and of course, we're going to, as part of our regional collaboration plan is when the timing's right, we're going to convene some members of North Yarmouth and Cumberland, right? Like, to me, I wouldn't worry too much about that far down the implementation timeline. I think it's important for it to be in there, right? Especially if it's a capital improvement project and it might be on a referendum in 5 years, you want it to be in here, right? So people can say, we've wanted this since 2025. That's the important part. And I think we hit the regional collaboration efforts in the appropriate section. Yeah, but I wouldn't, what this isn't, in my opinion, is a place to go line up North Yarmouth. I would just say, okay, this is what we want.
Right.
We have a good working relationship. Let's highlight that. Maybe have North Yarmouth sign off on the regional collaboration thing. Yeah, this looks good. Thanks, guys. And maybe we'll steal it for ours. Yeah, and then to me, that's okay. That's a success. And it opens the door for you guys to, if you haven't on certain issues to talk about.
They're fundraising. We don't need to.
Yeah.
That was a bad example. It was a bad example. Like,
Yeah, but I don't know anything about it, so that's good, right? So the good news is, it's right, in
Like,
general.
if
Right.
we want to combine all of the police departments into one from Yarmouth, North Yarmouth, that like that requires all of them to stakeholder buy-in, right? And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
so I'm trying to understand.
Sure, and that's like super bold, right? But what we could do is, okay, Bob's already started a subgroup of the 3 member communities. We wish to start having more active participation in discussions around shared police positions, code enforcement positions, animal control. Yeah,
Pursue.
pursue.
We will pursue.
Assessing departments. This is not unusual. In my experience right now, all around Cumberland County. In fact, I just gave a presentation to Cape Elizabeth Town Council. They don't have an economic development staff. Right? And my recommendation is don't hire an economic development staff. Go share the one in South Fork.
Yeah.
Right? And so those types of conversations are happening for all the reasons you just said. Those conversations are happening more and more and more, and they're actually a little bit more serious than they used to be. So we can seize the day on that.
So it could be less about naming specific towns and more about the spirit of shared services.
What we want, what our vision is, yeah.
Well, the scary elephant out there that you hear from and you are correct, looking at the scary thing right now is that because of how the school funding formula works, it goes on town-wide valuation. So because Yarmouth and Falmouth have a larger commercial valuation, their town valuation is significant. Whereas in Cumberland, probably we have 9% commercial, 92, but our valuation is less. So there are 2 pieces of the school funding formula. The first piece is the number of students you have, but the second piece is based on your town-wide state property valuation. So because we have less commercial, on a net basis, our cost per pupil is less than Falmouth and Yarmouth because we get a higher state subsidy. So the danger out there is if they change the state funding formula to something else, that we're of the greater Portland communities, the one that's going to suffer the most. But right now, under the funding formula, our net costs are below those four communities.
But we're also paying more than North Yarmouth for the same school system.
Well, that's a different thing. I mean, we're talking about the 30,000 foot major thing. I mean, I'm not ready to get into pissing contests with North Yarmouth. It has no productive value.
Paul, you have the floor.
Oh, no, I thought we were. I was waiting for you to call agenda item F. That's right, right?
Yeah.
That's all I have. So, yeah, I think again, things to mull over are, if you want to adopt that we would follow this as a committee, I think that's worth your time and effort for next meeting. Just to start thinking about how much would you actually craft some verbiage in the actual sections versus dictate to us what we wanted them. That's way down the road. It just helps us with staffing to kind of understand what we might do. And again, the subcommittee, I'm just trying to inch us forward. Subcommittee suggestions are straight from the checklist, and I don't have, those are my recommended actions, so to speak, but yeah, my part is over.
Questions for Paul? Okay, then we'll move on to item F as we approach 8 o'clock. Survey follow-up from the outreach committee. So Paul, last time we established an outreach committee for the purpose of, at least initially, coming up with a survey. We had 4 or 5 volunteers to serve on that particular subcommittee. We had our first meeting on Tuesday this week. And we went.
What? You didn't tell us about it? Congratulations, that's great.
It was a good meeting. We were given 3 plans from other communities, Durham, Gray, and Scarborough, and for various reasons, we didn't find that any of them fit really well. And I won't, unless you want me to, take a lot of time and going through the details of that. But we did conclude that our current survey, our last survey from 2022 was actually pretty good. And it's a better model for where we may want to go than the other three. So we then assigned among his 5 members of the outreach committee, writing assignments to come up with draft chapters for an entire plan.
Draft question.
Questions. Oh, yeah, exactly. Yes, that's right. Questions for the survey. And we have a April 17 deadline from Bridget for the submission of all of our questions. And then we'll be meeting I think the following week.
So we're meeting the 17th. To me on the 6th, by the end of the day on the
Okay,
16th,
we
we're gonna meet on the 17th.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll, we will, in the meantime, we'll exchange what we've written with each other. And the whole thing should obviously be harmonious and consistent. And we'll work out any kinks and let you know how we do. The goal is to get a survey out there ideally by mid-May. We hope to make that the target. So we're moving along. And so that's a synopsis of our Tuesday night meeting. And so we're hard at it. So I think that takes it. Any questions from those who are not on the outreach committee that they want?
I mean, I just say like, I don't disagree with sort of following what we've done in the past, but the problem that has been identified for sure with what's happened in the past is that it doesn't necessarily, there's so many different ways for folks to interpret certain questions. I'm thinking specifically of the housing, affordable housing questions, things
Yes,
of that nature. So just
I
sort of
raised that.
making sure that is drilled into a little bit more than
Exactly.
it has been in the past.
I made that point.
Yeah.
And a variety of responses
Mhm.
to my point, but we're going to pursue it.
Mhm.
So I
Sounds
think I saw
good.
you first, then Kathy.
Oh, okay. I want to put a plug in for what we talked about at the last meeting of maybe having that really easy early entry. What do you like about your community question that gets thrown out before the survey comes out? To get people primed of thinking. And I think starting with a positive question, what do you like about your community? Rather than tell me everything you hate about Cumberland.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to start out that way.
No, I know. I'm just saying, but you know what I mean? I think it would be just a really low risk entry point to start getting feedback from people that could still inform the survey.
I think we agreed with you on that, right?
Yeah.
Just that, and then not focusing on questions like, what do you think of the town services? What do you think of the fire department?
Yeah.
Or, right, and,
Yeah.
More focused on what
Yeah.
do you think the direction of the town is?
Yeah. Kind of what's great about Cumberland.
And people will let you know if they don't like the town services. We don't need to ask.
No.
We actually didn't talk about this, but the survey from 3 years ago began with, what do you like best about the town? And with this box filled with words, lower character, quaint, this, safety, so forth and so on. We didn't talk about, my personal feeling is that that's so recent and so unlikely to have changed that I'm not sure there's any point in asking that same question again. But we will begin, rather than with hard stuff, with basically demographic type questions, which get people to answer the easy stuff. How old are you? How long have you been here? Where do you work? What town do you work in?
I just think if we're targeting May to launch a survey, we should have something going on now that
Well-
lets people know it's coming.
We're going to be planning, I think I mentioned last time,
Yeah.
on a postcard
Perfect.
that'll go out to alert people to be on the lookout for the
Mhm.
survey. And that will certainly be a positive,
Mhm.
drawn piece of material.
We should be having something in the town crier every week now. Notifying people.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Bob.
About
Yeah,
the survey. Get
Yeah.
ready.
maybe,
You might want to wait
Bridget,
until
you-
you have an actual date though.
Yeah, I think so. It's not far.
maybe so, but let's work on that, Bridget, and and with Whitney and see if we get something up, even if, and still think in terms of the postcard itself.
I do have one question.
Oh, yes, please.
So one of the items that, at the council level, we had hoped the comp plan would dig into are the hours within the TCD specifically. I think everyone probably recalls Rise Pizza wanted to stay open for an additional hour. And the council and the planning board, I think we did not come to a decision, and we're hoping that as part of this work in this body, that would really be drilled into, not just for Rise, but for all of the businesses within the TCD. And so I was just curious, and maybe the survey isn't the correct place to be doing it, but where are we going to drill into the community's feedback on not only the TCD, but hours in all of the other zones? The Rusty Lantern is 24 hours a day, right? Like, so. being
Okay,
able
so
to
here's
get
my
that ledger. Yes,
response
please.
to this. Rather than us on this committee trying to guess what the council wants, why don't you tell us?
Oh, yeah, I can pull together a priority list of
Right.
things that we have not acted on because we wanted them
Yes,
to be.
because we may not assume or know
Sure.
that you want
Yeah.
feedback on this particular point.
I
So
can pull that
go
together.
ahead and tell us if there's a.
Yeah, I mean, that is one that comes to, that is probably the biggest one that we officially put over to the comprehensive plan. On the housing part, following the referendum last year and where that project landed. As part of the survey, having an understanding of what affordable housing actually means to people. Does that mean a larger project? Does that mean looking at ADUs? Does that mean, so
Right.
really drilling into what the community wants there.
Yeah.
Bob, can you think about anything official?
Just bear in mind, we don't actually have a charge from the council,
Yeah, we do.
a written charge.
We have a written, yep, they're in our, like, we established them early on, our
Yeah.
bylaws,
Or our bylaws,
yeah,
yes.
which is from council. Go do this.
I didn't, I think our bylaws were a charge from the council.
They're adapted from the,
I mean, we
Council.
talked the other night about how the council charged the record advisory board to come up with the Twin Brook management plan.
Yeah.
There was a written charge. I don't think we have anything equivalent.
I thought we did.
yeah, we do.
Okay, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it.
I can find it and get it out.
Okay. Oh, Kathy, yes.
So I was charged with questions about historic areas and so forth. But most of the surveys have nothing about historic, so I'm wondering if Bridget or you two know of a town that's got something to guide me for questions in the survey for historical areas. I think of some stuff, but I really would like something guidelines.
Whether, I understand that you guys opted not to do any of the three styles you were given, but there might be some questions on there that you can at least steal and start, massaging, I think.
Oh, yeah.
From
We
the-
agree with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So to answer your question, I think like the Scarborough one had some pretty detailed historic questions, if you wanted to use those as starting points.
Boy, that was a tough.
Yeah,
survey.
I did.
Well,
see
the
that.
format was given to you. I wish I could have come up with the original survey, but yes, agreed. It was tough. It was like 45 minutes of user time to, yeah. But I guess what I'm saying is, even though you're not opting for that format, I think there's a chunk of historical questions on there that you can at least use it for your own, like, hey, let me use this as a starting point. Because I think that's what you're asking for, like, hey, can I get some starting template?
I
questions?
also have open space, and something that comes to mind for me in West Cumberland is by the river that's near J Brothers. And we've got the old interurban trolley line going over that river, but it's also a very popular fishing hole and used to be for swimming as well. We got CMP right beside it, and I don't know whether is that because it's historical and open space. Is that something that we can use to create down the road? I just,
Create what,
well, an open space park or
you
something
mean
like
buy
that.
land?
Hmm?
You mean have the town buy some land?
Possibly, but you know, you got the CMP corridor going right beside it. If
Beside
not,
it or through?
I think it's almost actually kind of going through it.
If it's CMP land, we may not
Yeah,
have much option.
okay. Because, you know, I wasn't sure of regulations and that type of thing.
I think you could ask something like, do you feel any parts of town are underserved by parkland, or that there are any opportunities that haven't been fully explored or taken advantage of? I think there's a couple of different ways to get at that kind of thing without it being about a specific site.
Now, one thing that did happen way back, the Logan family house sat there and because the parents passed away. But there was some kind of agreement going on with CMP and they ended up, CMP took the house down. But they put up a memorial and a few little trees there for that, the Logan family. So it sounds to me like they're willing to do some work, you know, people. But now it was.
Well, it's a good thought, but
It
we'll have
was
to
a
check to
combination,
see who owns the
so I
land.
don't know what to ask for.
Well,
Okay. But I figured like between you and Peter, I could get
Sure.
some with.
sure.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, under new business, let's talk about future meetings. So, the outreach committee meets a week from tonight, 2 weeks from tonight, 24th. Now, is that school vacation week? It is, okay, so this, we touched on this Tuesday night. How realistic is it for us to plan to meet during school vacation week? So maybe April week.
I'll be here.
Who's here?
Who's here? Well, okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Good turnout.
Okay.
So we'll plan then to meet on the 24th. Okay.
And then
Never gone away, I'm finally.
our two breaking news, our two May meetings will both be at West Cumberland. We've been kicked out of this room, but we have other areas in town, so our,
Good.
the
All
8th
right.
and the 22nd will be at West Cumberland Hall.
When does Caddy's open?
Oh, I don't know.
It isn't open at 8 when you get out.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it open later?
Open at 8.
Is it?
So we
Oh,
can
yeah,
get
you got
dinner.
All right. Make sure to finish in time to see Caddy.
All right then, anything else, folks, before we adjourn? I'll see some of you at 1 week, the rest of you. Oh, do you? Okay.
Thank you.
Bob,
Yeah.
We
there's 200 towns in Maine that are unzoned.
Yeah, this one is 200,000.
I bet you that's.
Hey,